Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining our weekly podcast. I'm Robin Lewis, founder and CEO of the Robin Report, which, by the way, is much, much more than just a daily report. Okay, we believe it's really a knowledge platform from which we do communicate thought leadership on various strategic topics through the daily reports, yes, but also these podcasts. And we do webinars and live events in the future, of course. So along with our chief strategist, Shelley Kohan, who, by the way, is also a professor at FIT and Syracuse University, we welcome you to our weekly podcast, the topic of which is Retail Leadership for Extraordinary Times. You know, the title of which many of you may be thinking, well, I've heard this before. Well, you have. And along those lines, I am thrilled, really thrilled to have the chairman of the World Retail Congress, Ian McGarrigle, here with us today to discuss this very topic. And welcome, Ian, and we're very honored to have you with us. Retail leadership for extraordinary times has never been more important. And I believe, Ian, this is the topic for the World Retail Congress coming up this year, which, by the way, is being held in Barcelona, Spain, April 25th through April 27th. And not a bad place to be, is it? Ian?
Not at all, not at all. It's a great city. It's a special city for us. It's where we launched the World Retail Congress back in 2007, when the retail world was certainly a very different place. But
Yep.
Thank you, Robin, and thanks, Shelley. Delighted to be here. But yeah, you're right. Retail leadership for extraordinary times. That's our theme for this year's Congress. It just felt, after many weeks and months even of talking to the retail industry since last year's Congress, you know, how could we summarize the world we're in and what retail is facing? And let's be honest, it's probably the most challenging times that I've seen. But that, more importantly, that's what retail CEOs are telling me. They've never known a time like this. So it just felt like that's the best way to summarize where we're at and what our focus is going to be for this year's Congress.
Yep, and it's a big deal. And Ian, Shelley, and I have been talking about the impact of, you know, the pandemic on the retail environment, and quite frankly, on the world, you know. And in our last two podcasts, retooling and speeding up the transformation to the new retail models, really creating a new normal, which is what I believe we're all in the middle of doing. And we did touch upon some of the seismic shifts in the business process, and as well as consumer behavior. There's just all kinds of major changes going on. So, but we would really love to hear your perspective, you know, maybe a bird's eye view from 30,000 feet up on the current state of retail and the consumer, and really what prompted you to design this year's World Retail Congress based on leading for the future.
Yeah, sure. And as you say, you know, retooling retail, I mean, that very much, I know, Robin, you've been writing and talking about this for a long time. And I think the pandemic came along and it forced the whole industry. I mean, you're absolutely right. It was, as a pandemic, global pandemic, you know, the retail industry was impacted. And, you know, over the last 3 years, speaking to retailers literally around the world, it's remarkable the similarity, the pressures that they've all been under and had to face. But I think it's also retail leadership teams have realized this is one of those moments where they had to grasp the situation and react to save their businesses and serve their customers. So the fact that they you know, really had to think radically and take some big decisions to move fast, and we've seen in sort of the last 2 to 3 years how retail has risen to the challenge and changed because it had to. But we're now starting to see a new kind of retailing emerge in reaction to where we're at. I mean, and yeah, we've built our theme around that overarching headline of retail leadership for extraordinary times, because it's unfortunately the industry is faced not with the pandemic and the overhang from that. I mean, unfortunately, we've got massive geopolitical and economic pressures. We're coming up to the first anniversary of the war in Ukraine, and the severe effects of that are impacting everywhere around the world. But you know, focusing on retail, you know, that's caused this massive hike in inflation, and along with the impact of the pandemic and how the world is trying to get going again. But you know, Ukraine has had a huge impact. So just when we thought we were looking at recovery sort of this time last year, it's led to even more challenging, extraordinary times for retail to adapt to. And that's kind of really where we're focused, and that's what we're looking at. And I'm really trying to help support the industry and bringing together people to really address, you know, how they look at the here and now in retail, what they should be doing around tackling those pressures they have no control over, like inflation, supply chain. But you know, we're seeing retail move fast to look at that. But at the same time, the future is just accelerating towards us ever faster. And I think that's the bit that is extraordinary now, and why retailers talk about never knowing so many challenges, because you know, these tough times often means people will cut budgets, stop doing things, but you really can't stop investing in the future. I mean, if you do, then your competitors are just going to get ever stronger. So there's a real, almost diametrically opposed pressures that that retail is facing.
Right. You know, and I think that new retail model is something that's not stagnant, which is what I really appreciate about what you're saying. So we have this kind of new normal, but it's just continuing to evolve at a very preemptive rate. So staying ahead of the consumer has never been easy, but today it's probably the most challenging it's ever been for retailers.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Well, you know, one of the core topics this year at the World Retail Congress is what you call resilient retail. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about this, and maybe provide some examples of what today's leaders really should be thinking about in terms of resiliency?
Yeah, we've identified a number of core areas, but the really important one we're calling resilient retail, which basically comes out of, again, so many conversations, and retailers talked to me about how can we build resilience into our retail model to face up to these, you know, extraordinary conditions. You know, inflation alone, we've not seen the like of it for 40 years, 30, 40 years. There can be very, very few retail leaders in position now who faced it that period ago. So on that basis, you know, retailers are forced to look at, you know, how they can embrace these rising costs, how they can keep the business moving forward. Retail is built around growth, so how can you achieve and deliver that growth, but at the same time, you know, manage the business to be ever more efficient. But I think the other key piece is that, you know, their customers, the consumers in many parts of the world, certainly here in Europe, there's a cost of living crisis. So, you know, retailers have to think about serving and helping and supporting their customers. We've seen many examples of that from, you know, Primark, which is a hugely successful, they don't like being called fast fashion retail, but a fashion retailer, a value-driven retailer that's doing extraordinarily well in the US now as well. But they've publicly pledged to keep their margins and you know, really tight, so that they can continue to deliver low, great value prices to their customers. But I think this is a point, you know, resilience. What we're seeing is retailers turning to technology and AI and all these tools at their fingertips to really help make their business more efficient. And it's as I was saying to Robin earlier, this is one of those points where retailers see it as a sort of pivotal moment to really you know, all things that have become theoretical or ideas. This is a point in time where retailers are really moving rapidly, and we saw that just a few weeks ago at the NRF show in New York. And you know, 1,000 exhibitors, all primarily in the technology space, you know, an extraordinary array of solutions that's now available to retailers to help drive and deliver that resilience, I think, and efficiency in the business.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, things are moving so fast; it's incredible, and in many ways, technology is still ahead of us. I mean, it's still moving faster, and being a CEO in this environment, and really starting back during the pandemic, has been probably one of the most challenging periods of leadership. Right? I mean, the skill set requirements have expanded exponentially. I mean, the depth of talent has narrowed also, and so the world has become a much more complex. And you are right, Ian. It is it is lonely at the top. I mean, I get a chance to talk to a few of these CEOs every so often, and you can read between the lines. I mean, it's tougher than ever. So it begs the question, how are our leaders coping with this massive shift that's now required of them? I mean, you mentioned many of the strategies that are required to run a business profitably, supply chain, dealing with high inflation. And I will add, Ian, worker shortages to that list. So, but when I look at the CEO role, one of the areas that really stands out and is actually far easier said than done is driving, ESG change. Really focusing on the three pillars, of the environment, social, and governance. And those are things that really weren't around in the old world. I mean, they were to an extent, but not the way they are today. I mean, there are just so many things out there that are adding more and more weight on these CEOs. So, and also, and Ian, this from your many conversations, I'm sure companies are being put on notice by their stakeholders, which includes consumers, their boards, vendors, communities, and on, whether it's environmental initiatives that, save the planet, or creating more inclusive working environments for employees and customers, or corporate governance, including hot topics of shareholder activists, or lastly, just plain ethical responsibility. So what's your take on this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think everything you've listed there reinforces that the loneliness of the retail CEO because they're just under so many pressures. I mean, and we're looking at this we're calling it purposeful retail, but everything you've described is absolutely right, and it chimes with what we heard at last year's World Retail Congress. And I think back to one of our key speakers last year was Paul Polman, the former CEO of Unilever, who now is a passionate advocate of ESG, particularly sustainability. But he talked a lot about, if as a business you don't understand what you seek to be, what your place in the world is, what you seek to put into the world and help communities, then his view was he couldn't see as a future for that business. And he got a standing ovation at the Congress, which, given that he gave the audience quite a rough ride, I thought was interesting. But I think he absolutely has the right point. I hear it so many times from some, really good, strong retailers who believe that, because amongst all of the challenges that the industry is facing, there's these existential but really important issues that have to be faced around ESG. But I think sustainability, you're right, that there's multiple pressures led clearly by the environment and the climate itself. There's a limited window of time here that the whole world has to address that, and retail does genuinely, I think, feel its in place and its importance in that. But yeah, it's also about the kind of businesses they seek to be in everything that they deliver. And you mentioned people. I think that's hugely important. I think having a sense of who you are, what you stand for, whether it's sustainability policies or social policies, it's not just about the customers you attract, it's about the people you want to and need to attract into the business. And it's a huge issue. Coming out of the pandemic, we all know about the Great Resignation and how tough it's been to recruit into retail and other sectors like hospitality. But the industry also needs, you mentioned it quite rightly, as retail is transforming, it needs to attract people with specific skills into the industry. So retail needs to, and is sort of, there's some real key retailers that are leading the way in this in terms of how they're approaching it. But the rest of the industry, needs to look at this and is sort of waking up to what they need to, how they present themselves and how they operate. So I think the old way of retailing, the old command and control sort of structures, it doesn't fit or work for today's world in any sense. I think there's so many challenges, but it's absolutely critical that retail can take a leading role in this. And I think what I'm excited about, because I hear more and more conversations, retail thrives on innovation and new ideas and solutions. And I think I'm hearing more and more people turning their attention specifically to how do we use this talent pool and this innovation pool to look at delivering sustainability targets. How do we change the way we do things? So I think lots of challenges, but I think it's a hugely exciting time in retail.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, the content that you're delivering is so powerful. And Ian, congratulations. I saw the lineup of speakers that you have. Mm-hmm. That is going to just add such rich engagement on purposeful retail. The other topic that I thought was really fascinating, of course, something I'm really interested in for the World Retail Congress, is the transformational retail. So, we are trying, the industry is trying really hard to adapt and change, but keeping up with technological advances has always been a challenge. Yep. And what's happening is, technology is being deployed at a faster rate than the retail industry can use it in what I would say are relevant ways. So, this whole hybrid shopping model that's really being driven by consumer demand of preemptive distribution and the use of technology to further both online and offline models, well, it's just transformational. So maybe you can talk a little bit about this, where you come from, where you see the World Retail Congress at. What are your top leaders and influencers talking about?
Absolutely, Shelley. I mean, I think, the pandemic undoubtedly accelerated change in the industry. That's the phrase that I heard so many times. But now where we are, in the last few months, we did see that massive acceleration in e-commerce for obvious reasons. When at peak lockdown, how else were people going to shop? So we saw, retailers arrive at a percentage of their sales online at a point they would never have expected for another 5 years. People were talking about. And then we saw, with the return to stores in the way we have, that balance has fallen back a bit. But I think the word I hear so many times from retailers is omni-channel, that this is now an omni-channel world in a way that was talked about, I don't know, was it 5-6 years ago when that phrase first was used? But now I think there's a real sense that this is where we're at. There's retail now is on and offline, but consumers don't talk about, seeing it that way. It's all retail, it's all shopping. They will shop how, where, when, and how they want. And that's the bit I think that is transformational. It's, retailers trying to grapple with and understand, well, how does that omni-channel model work? What does it need? I think just because e-commerce growth rates have slipped back a bit, for me, I think it feels like it's just waiting for the next phase. So again, in terms of, as you were saying, Shelley, like, where should retailers be looking and where should they be investing? And I think there's no doubt that, they are looking and should be looking at how e-commerce, 2.0, if I can call it that, sort of what that will look like, what it means. I think social commerce is growing exponentially. Live streaming, which hasn't quite made the cut through that it has in China, but probably will, and short form sort of video content on social media platforms, that is already sort of really booming. But it's how does that work seamlessly and frictionlessly for consumers? So it's that magic point where technology isn't leading the way, but it's at the right point that really helps the consumer. But I think for so many long established retailers, the simple fact is, IT systems and platforms, it's a jigsaw of systems that's that has to be tackled, and it's not going to come cheap, is it? So and change is never easy, but I think we're at that point of realization that retailers are looking at. And so many retailers say about the World Retail Congress program, if we could help give them the vision for what we will look like in 2 to 3 years, which I'm not sure anyone has that magic sort of crystal ball, but it's something that just shows you, I think, where we're at. Everyone is really focused on that near-term future, because that's going back to the CEOs making big tough calls and decisions. That's I think where we're at. It's like, what's that direction of travel? Because trends and issues change so fast, don't they? I mean, 6 months ago, pure play retailers were the leading cutting edge of retail, and no one was interested in anything store based. That's flipped around in 6 months almost, it seems. So it's incredible. But you just know that the future is a mix and a blending of that on and offline worlds.
Well, Ian, you hit the nail on the head when you said that, the consumer doesn't know the word omnichannel. The consumer doesn't know about IT. Consumer doesn't know anything about the complexity of the retail business. The only thing they know is they've got more power than any consumers before them. And they, in fact, whether they know it or not, are really driving the business. They, in fact, today are the point of sale. It is wherever they are, whenever they want it, how they want it, and over and over and over. And this is the enormous complexity that our retailers and brands are faced with. I mean, to be able to engage with that consumer wherever they are, whenever they want it. So, we started with the consumer. So let's end kind of talking about the consumers as well. I mean, we know that the retailers that will succeed long term are those that really and truly put the customer, the consumer, at the center of all decisions that lead to adding value and increasing benefits for the consumer. Most retailers and brands will talk the talk, and they've talked the talk to you, Ian, they've talked to me and Shelley. However, way too few of them are really walking the walk. And that's why they need events like the World Retail Congress to get some education and to learn from the ones who are really making it happen. And, there is so much data out there to analyze. And while artificial intelligence has made understanding the data easier, which, by the way, provides a huge opportunity to actually drill down to a very precise level to really get to personalization, that word that's probably overused and least understood. We're finally able to get there if you got the people who understand how to do it. So it is no longer kind of, mass segmentation, but really today it's possible to get down to individual segmentation, right?
Absolutely.
And I do not think many retailers or brands are really there yet.
No, and let me just jump in here. So one of my big retail trends this year is called social media sentiment monitoring, which is the process of collecting and analyzing information on how people are talking about a retailer or a brand on social media. So with retailers, if they're actively being engaged on social media, they can understand data about their customers' sentiment, preferences, attitudes about their company, about their competitors. Retailers can then create this large follower base, and they can use the data and sentiment monitoring to really better understand the consumer mindset, maybe more accurately forecast trends, shopping behaviors, product preferences. So monitoring, social media and expanding social commerce opportunities can really actually create high value loyalty with a fan base. So I guess the way I would kind of summarize it is to say that social media sentiment monitoring is understanding consumer behavior before the shopper journey begins. It's really getting into the head of the consumer.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if I totally agree. And another area we're focused on with the program, we're calling it customer focused retailing, which sounds fairly obvious. We've heard a lot over the years about customer centricity, a bit like omni-channel, but truly now coming out of this last 3 years where everything seems to have changed. So many people saying we as consumers, we have all changed. Then you kind of say, well, have we changed? But human behavior doesn't really change, but yeah, we can clearly see how we want to shop and how we're engaged. But Shelley, you're right. I think if I look at some high growth startup retailers, almost, where they begin is social media, where they begin is building communities. We've seen that here in the UK. One of the standout growth brands is Gymshark, which is really affordable pricing, sort of gym wear and athleisure, but it began literally, as best ideas do, out of a garage, and used social media to build communities. But Lululemon's another great example of that. But yeah, for me, it's that art and science, isn't it? I think science is critical here. We've got the technology, we've got data analytics, and that's a huge area that is talked about so much, quite rightly, because as Robin says, the trick is to harness that to be able to drill down, to talk to us each as individuals and make us feel like that brand, that retailer understands us, is looking after us, is sending us information we want, and is serving our needs. But also we like to all feel we belong to groups or communities, and the more retailers can do that, I think that's going to be the trick. But I think we shouldn't overlook the art as well. I think for me, it's the idea of the merchant print seems to be sort of less talked about these days. But for me, the art of real retailing is that magic where you've got people in stores who just interact with customers. They know the product, know their customers, and how can you build on that in a digital world? And I think that's going to be the magic prize. And I think it would be a shame if retail loses that magic. And that's certainly not, from what I see and hear and still talk to some of the best retailers, it's that instinct of knowing and wanting to serve their customers. But now increasingly there's really sophisticated tools that help with that. And I think in the world that we're in and will emerge rapidly, I think having that blend of art and science to really put the consumer first at the heart of everything that they do. That's again another reason why I think we're at a really exciting phase and stage in retailing.
Ian, all of those points are just fantastic, and I love the way you finished up there with the art and science of retail, and of course Shelley pointed that out, and how that's the other piece that we have to go after is social media, and we can really get into the emotional aspects of it and the art of it eventually, ultimately. And so this WRC is going to be fantastic. And Ian, we're so glad that you joined us to go through this. And you gave us a very clear picture of just how significant and really information-packed this World Retail Congress is going to be. And Shelley and I looked at what you've got on the agenda there, and it's fantastic. So thanks again very much. We're honored to have you. And to close, please tell our audience how they can register to attend. And I'll just close it by saying, hey, Barcelona in the spring is not such a bad place to be either, right?
No, it will be fabulous come end of April. But no, thanks, Robin, and thanks, Shelley. And all people need to do is go onto our website, worldretailcongress.com. You can find out all the information about the program, the speakers, and how you can book. And as the Robin Report are our key media partners, there's a special discount for subscribers to the Robin Report. So please do check that out as well. But looking forward to welcoming you, Robin, to Barcelona. Should be great, and
Love it.
To participate in the program. But I hope as many listeners as possible will join us, because it's going to be, I think it's a key time in retail, and I think there's going to be some great, really informative discussions. So thank you for this opportunity, and really enjoyed this discussion. Thank you both.
Thank you so much, Ian. It's great having you here. And like I said, congrats on an amazing lineup this year. For our listeners, you can find more of our podcasts on Apple, Spotify, Buzzsprout, and of course, therobinreport.com. Look for us on YouTube, where we broadcast our podcast as well. And please follow us on social media. Link in with us for the latest thoughts about the industry.
And a last big thank you for joining us today. And get over to Barcelona. This I've been fortunate to attend several of the last World Retail Congresses, and I never walk away without having learned an incredible amount of good stuff. And you'll see real leaders from around the world advising and talking about this transformation that we're going through. And the last thing, which I always do, is if any of you have an idea or a topic that you're thinking about and would love Shelley and I to do or cover, please send me an email. It is Robin, R-O-B-I-N, @therobinreport.com. And thanks again very much for joining us.